My name is Isabella Costa, and at 30 years old, I finally feel ready to share my story. It all started when I was 13, during what I believed to be the happiest time of my life. My family was simple but complete. My father, Carlos, was a hardworking construction worker. My mother, Veronica, balanced her part-time job as an accountant with taking care of our home. And I was their only child. We lived in a modest house on Magnolia Street, in a quiet neighborhood where everyone seemed to know each other. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and it felt safe. It was a Tuesday morning, like so many others. My dad kissed me on the forehead before heading out the door, lunchbox in hand, and with his usual, "See you tonight, Isa." I had no idea it would be the last time I'd ever hear him say those words. By lunchtime, the news came. There had been an accident at the construction site. A scaffolding collapsed, and my dad was one of the workers who didn't make it. The world as I knew it crumbled. My mom broke down completely, and the months that followed were a haze of muted conversations, casseroles dropped off by well-meaning neighbors, and the overwhelming silence that seemed to fill every corner of our house. My mother stopped going to work. She spent most of her days curled up on the couch, staring into nothingness. It was like she had disappeared, even though she was still physically there. I had to step up, whether I was ready or not. I took over the small responsibilities, making simple dinners, cleaning up, and doing my best to keep up with school. I missed her. I missed us. 6 months later, when I had just started to find some kind of rhythm in the chaos, my mom sat me down in the kitchen. She was gripping her coffee cup so tightly that I thought it might crack. "Isa," she said hesitantly, "I need to tell you something." She took a deep breath. "I've met someone. His name is Artur. He's kind, and he makes me feel alive again." I was stunned. Alive? I wanted to ask her why I wasn't enough to make her feel alive, but I bit my tongue. What could I say? A part of me was glad to see her smiling again, even if it felt fragile. But another part of me, a darker and angrier part, wanted to scream. How could she move on so quickly? Looking back, I should have seen the signs, the late-night phone calls, the extra care she suddenly started putting into her appearance, the quick trips to the market that seemed to stretch on forever. But even if I had noticed, I don't think anything could have prepared me for what came next. 2 weeks after that conversation, Artur and his 6-year-old daughter Livia moved into our house. They arrived with boxes piled high and promises of a new beginning. Livia was like a porcelain doll. Her golden curls and bright blue eyes made her look like she had stepped out of a children's storybook. My mom was smitten with her immediately. "Isn't she adorable, Isa?" she gushed, practically glowing as she fussed over Livia. Meanwhile, I felt like I had disappeared. Before Artur and Livia moved in, it was just me and Mom trying to piece our lives back together. We were clumsy and messy about it, but at least we were doing it together. Now, it felt like she had transferred all the love she had left to this new family she was so desperate to create. Artur wasted no time in showing his true colors. At first he was polite, overly so, like he was trying to make a good impression. But soon enough, his demeanor shifted. He had opinions about everything: how my mom should decorate the house, how I should behave, and even how I spent my free time. "You're part of a family now, Isabella," he'd say with a condescending smile, as if I hadn't been part of one before he arrived. And then there was Artur's mother, Donna Dalva. She started visiting every weekend, always armed, with subtle but cutting remarks. During one of those visits, she pinched my cheeks and said, "What a big girl you are. Your mother should teach you better manners. Thankfully, Livia has such lovely grace." I can still feel the sting of those words, the way they cut deeper than she probably intended, or maybe exactly as deep as she intended. Little by little, these small cruelties became the new normal. Artur's rules and Dalva's sharp comments were constant reminders that I didn't belong in my own home anymore. My mom, for reasons I still don't fully understand, seemed blind to it all. Whenever I tried to bring it up, she brushed me off with, "Oh, Isa, you're imagining things." Or, "Artur means well." Eventually, I found an escape at my Aunt Marilia's house, just a few streets away. She was warm and welcoming, in a way my mom hadn't been in months. Her 4-year-old daughter, Sophia, became my little shadow, And playing with her gave me a sense of normalcy that I desperately needed. But no matter how much time I spent at my aunt's, I couldn't shake the feeling that my real home wasn't mine anymore. My house, the one where I had grown up with laughter and love, had become a place where I felt like an outsider. The walls held memories of my dad, but they were being painted over, literally and figuratively, by Arthur and Livia. I didn't have the words for it at the time, but I knew one thing for certain. I was slowly being erased from my own life. When I turned 16, something inside me shifted. I couldn't stand being treated like a burden anymore, like an unwanted presence in my own home. I decided that if I couldn't count on my mom to defend or support me, I would do it myself. That's when I started handing out flyers around the neighborhood, offering babysitting and dog walking services. At first, I didn't think anyone would hire me, but to my surprise, the calls started coming in quickly. Soon, I had a small group of clients, and for the first time in my life, I felt the satisfaction of earning my own money. It was empowering in a way I hadn't expected. After saving up for a few months, I bought myself a basic cell phone, a small but significant achievement. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine, something I had worked for on my own. I felt proud, almost like I had reclaimed a tiny piece of independence that had been slipping away since Arthur and Livia moved in. But my joy was short-lived. Livia spotted the phone one afternoon and, in her usual way, ran straight to her father. Moments later, Arthur stormed up the stairs, his face red with anger. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, holding the phone up like it was contraband. "I bought it with my own money," I said, trying to stay calm. He didn't even hesitate. He snatched the phone out of my hand, marched downstairs, and handed it to Livia. "She's younger and deserves it more than you," he said, his tone final. As if that settled the matter, it was the last straw. That night, I couldn't sleep. The anger and humiliation churned inside me like a storm. The next day at school, I confided in my teacher, Anna. She listened quietly, her expression growing more serious as I spoke. "We need to talk to the administration," she said firmly, guiding me to the principal's office. A meeting was arranged with my mom. When she arrived, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally take my side. But as soon as we walked out of the school building, her anger erupted. "How dare you embarrass our family like this?" she yelled, her voice sharp and cutting. I felt my stomach sink. Back at home, things only got worse. Arthur barely acknowledged my existence, and my mom avoided me altogether. I started spending more and more time at Aunt Marilia's house, where at least I felt seen and cared for. Despite everything, I focused on my studies. School became my sanctuary, a place where I could pour all my energy into building a future that no one could take away from me. I worked harder than ever, and by the time I reached my senior year, I applied to several universities. To my shock and relief, I was awarded a full scholarship to a state university. When I shared the news at dinner, I expected at least a small moment of recognition, something to acknowledge how far I had come. Instead, Arthur's reaction was explosive. "You did this without consulting me?" he shouted, slamming his fork onto the table. "Do you think you can make decisions on your own while living under my roof?" I turned to my mom, hoping for support, but she just sat there, her face impassive. Finally, she spoke, her voice cold. "You've always wanted to leave this family, Issa. Maybe it's for the best." Her words hit harder than Arthur's anger ever could. They were the confirmation I didn't know I needed. That night, I packed my bags and left for Aunt Marilia's house. It wasn't just about leaving the house. I was leaving behind the hope that things could ever go back to the way they were. For the first time, I truly understood that I was on my own. And while that realization was painful, it was also liberating. It meant I could finally start building a life that was mine. Aunt Marilia became my lifeline during one of the hardest transitions of my life. She had this way of making me feel like I belonged, even when everything else felt broken. One day, noticing how restless I had become, she introduced me to her friend Clara, the owner of a small Italian restaurant not far from her house. Clara was warm and straightforward, the kind of person who saw potential in people even when they couldn't see it in themselves. I could use some extra hands around. "Here," Clara said with a smile after our first meeting. "How about you start as a waitress? We'll figure out the rest as we go." I threw myself into the job, grateful for the distraction and the chance to earn my own way. The work was demanding, but I loved the rhythm of the restaurant, the chatter of customers, the clatter of dishes, and the warm smell of fresh pasta wafting from the kitchen. Clara quickly noticed my attention to detail and my knack for staying calm during the busiest shifts. "You have a natural talent for this, Isa," she said one evening as we locked up. "Running a place like this is all about the details. Stick with it, and you could go far." After a few months, Clara offered me a small apartment above the restaurant. It was modest, a single room with a kitchenette and a bathroom. But to me, it felt like freedom. For the first time, I had a space that was truly mine. I continued to juggle my studies and my job, and eventually, I graduated from college. By then, Clara had become more than a boss. She was a mentor, and in many ways, she felt like the family I had lost. When she decided to retire a few years later, she surprised me by offering me a partnership in the restaurant. "You've earned this, Isa," she said as she handed me the papers. "I want to see this place grow, and I can't think of anyone better to make that happen." She also brought in her niece, Letitia, a talented chef with big ideas for the menu. Together, Letitia and I worked to modernize the restaurant, blending tradition with innovation. Slowly but surely, our little Italian eatery became one of the most popular spots in town. Years passed, and life finally felt stable. I had built something I was proud of, and for the first time, I felt truly at peace. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs just when you think you've left the past behind. One afternoon, while organizing the reservations for an upcoming private event, I froze as I read the name on the booking. Livia. My stepsister. It was her engagement party. The night of the event arrived, and I kept myself busy, ensuring everything ran smoothly. Then they walked in. My mother, Artur, Livia, and, of course, Donna Dalva. They looked just as I remembered them. Though time had added a few lines to their faces, I greeted them professionally, refusing to let old wounds surface. But my mother didn't miss the chance to belittle me. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Our little waitress is still at it. How nice to see you working hard. For us." Artur joined in, grabbing a plate from the table and deliberately dropping it on the floor. "Oops," he said with a smirk. "Guess you've got something to clean now." For a brief moment, the old feelings of anger and helplessness bubbled up, but I pushed them aside. This wasn't the scared teenager they used to control. Straightening my posture, I calmly replied, "I'm not your waitress. My name is Isabella Costa, and I'm the co-owner of this restaurant." The room went silent. Artur's smug expression faltered, and my mother looked genuinely stunned. "I'm sorry, but we don't tolerate disrespect here," I continued. "You'll need to leave." Before they could argue, Letitia, who had witnessed the exchange, stepped in with the signed event contract. "Clause 14, she said firmly, pointing to the paper. "We reserve the right to remove anyone behaving inappropriately." Our staff escorted them out as the other guests watched in awkward silence. For the first time, I didn't feel small in their presence. I felt powerful, like I had reclaimed a part of myself they had tried to take away. That night, as I closed the restaurant with Letitia, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The people who had once made me feel invisible were now the ones who had to face the consequences of their actions. And for the first time in years, I truly felt free. The fallout from the engagement party was far more dramatic than I had anticipated. Unbeknownst to me, several guests had captured the confrontation on their phones. By the next morning, clips of Artur's tantrum and my calm dismissal of him and his family were circulating on social media. The video was shared widely, with captions like "Bride stepdad humiliated at engagement party" and "Restaurant owner stands up to rude guests." It didn't take long for Artur's professional reputation to take a hit. Comments flooded in, painting him as arrogant and disrespectful, with many speculating about his personal life. His business partners started to distance themselves, and the deals he had long prided himself on fell apart one by one. Livia, caught in the middle of the spectacle, was devastated. The attention brought unwanted scrutiny, and her fiancé's family reportedly demanded that she get her house in order before they proceeded with the wedding. Unable to manage the pressure, she called off the engagement. My mother reached out a few weeks later. Her tone was softer than I remembered, almost hesitant. She started with an apology, saying she hadn't realized how much I had suffered and that seeing me stand up to Artur had made her reflect. But as she continued, it became clear that her regret was more about losing face in front of others than about the years of pain I had endured. "I just want us to be close again, Issa," she said, her voice breaking slightly. For a long moment, I considered it. I had spent so many years yearning for her approval, for her to finally choose me over the life she had built with Artur. But standing there, listening to her words, I realized something important. I didn't need her approval anymore. "I appreciate that you're reaching out," I said gently, "but some things can't be undone. I've built a life for myself, and I'm happy now. I hope you find happiness too." Her face fell, and for a moment, I saw the woman who had once been my mom, the one who used to tuck me in at night and tell me stories. But I also saw the person who had turned her back on me when I needed her most. Some wounds, I realized, aren't meant to heal. They're meant to teach us to let go. Years have passed since that moment. Today I manage 3 thriving restaurants, each one a testament to the hard work and resilience that carried me through some of my darkest days. Letitia and I remain close partners, and together we've created spaces where people feel welcome and respected, a reflection of the life I've built for myself. When I look back, I don't feel bitterness or regret. Instead, I feel pride. I took the pain and betrayal I experienced and turned it into something powerful. I learned to value myself, to stand tall even when the people I loved most tried to knock me down. Some ties, no matter how strong they once were, need to be broken. And in breaking them, we create space to grow, to flourish, and to become the person we were always meant to be.